My name is Harper Vale. I'm 29 years old, and the night my brother locked me inside that abandoned garage, I finally understood that some people don't betray you loudly. They smile first. He had asked me to come there for one last conversation about my father's business. His voice on the phone had been calm, almost gentle, like we were still family, like he hadn't spent the past month pushing me to sign away the only thing my father trusted me to protect. I should have known better. The moment I stepped into that old garage, the air changed. Not because of the cold, because of the silence. It was too empty, too still, like the place had been waiting for me. Then the metal door slammed shut behind me. I spun around and grabbed the handle, but it didn't move. The lock clicked from the outside. For a second, I didn't even scream. I just stood there, staring at the door, trying to convince myself this was some sick joke. Then his voice came through the metal. "You should have just signed, Harper." My stomach dropped. I pounded my fist against the door. "Open it." He laughed quietly. Not angry, not nervous. Calm. That was the worst part. "You can scream all you want," he said. "No one's coming." That was when I knew this wasn't a fight anymore. This was a trap. My phone was gone. My keys were gone. My coat was on the other side of the door. There was no heat, no food, no signal, and nobody knew where I really was. For 24 hours, I survived by refusing to panic. And just when the cold started making my thoughts blur, I found something inside an old truck that my brother had forgotten existed. A radio. When the voice finally answered through the static, I nearly smiled. Because I didn't just find help. I found the one person who could make sure my brother lost everything. Before I tell you whose voice came through that radio, and what happened when my brother realized I was still alive, tell me, what's the weather like where you are right now, and does it match your mood today? Also, where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. 5 weeks before that garage door closed behind me, my father died on a night cold enough to make the lake look like black glass. His name was Arthur Vale, and he had built Vale Cold Line Logistics from 2 refrigerated vans, 1 rented warehouse, and a stubborn belief that promises mattered more when the roads were dangerous. We did not move glamorous things. We moved frozen food, hospital supplies, specialty medicine, emergency meal kits, and anything else that had to arrive at the right temperature or become worthless. In Duluth, Minnesota, that meant our work mattered most when everyone else wanted to stay home. Snowstorms, highway closures, broken compressors, drivers stranded outside Superior, hospital calls at 2 in the morning. Those were the things I grew up around. My father used to say, "A warm smile is nice, Harper, but a cold truck saves lives." I started working for him when I was 16, cleaning inventory shelves and logging freezer temperatures after school. By 22, I was riding with drivers during winter runs. By 26, I was managing routes, repair schedules, client emergencies, fuel costs, driver complaints, warehouse inspections, and the 1,000 tiny problems that never showed up on a balance sheet, but could destroy a company overnight. My brother, Logan Vale, had a different kind of relationship with the business. He liked the office side, the investor calls, the clean numbers, the polished shoes, the feeling of sitting at a conference table while other people handled the freezing wind and diesel fumes. He had worked in banking before he came back, and for a while, my father thought his financial experience would help us modernize. I wanted to believe that too. Logan was charming when he needed to be. He could explain a bad quarter like it was a strategic sacrifice. He could make debt sound like opportunity. He could make himself sound necessary. But there was always something behind his smile, something calculating, like every conversation had a price tag only he could see. After my father died, the will was read in a small conference room above the main warehouse. I still remember the hum of the old heater, the smell of coffee nobody touched, and the way Logan sat back in his chair with one ankle over his knee like he had already won. Then the attorney read the numbers. I received 55% control of Vail Cold Line Logistics. Logan received 45% ownership, with profit rights, but no final authority over operations, emergency contracts, fleet sales, or company transfer decisions. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Then Logan laughed once under his breath. Not because it was funny, because he wanted everyone in that room to know he was offended. "That cannot be right," he said. The attorney calmly repeated that my father's instructions had been reviewed, signed, witnessed, and updated only 8 months before his death. Logan's jaw tightened. He looked at me like I had stolen something from him. I wanted to say I was sorry, but I wasn't. Not really. I was grieving, but I also knew my father had made the right choice. He knew who answered the phone when a driver jackknifed on an icy highway. He knew who stayed in the warehouse during power outages. He knew who could tell from one compressor noise whether a trailer had 6 hours left or 60 minutes. Logan knew money. I knew the company. That difference became the crack that split our family open. At first, he pretended to accept it. He hugged me after the meeting, his hand resting too firmly between my shoulder blades, and whispered, "We'll figure out what's best." I thought he meant what was best for the business. Later, I learned he meant what was best for him. Within a week, he started calling me every night with concerns. He said the company was too complicated for me to run alone. He said lenders respected him more. He said clients would feel safer if a man with financial experience took the lead. He said grief could cloud judgment, and maybe I should step back before I damaged what Dad built. I told him I appreciated his advice, but I was not signing anything. That was when his tone changed. He stopped sounding like a brother and started sounding like a creditor. One afternoon, he invited me to lunch at a glass-walled restaurant downtown, the kind of place where nobody raised their voice because everyone was too busy pretending not to listen. He slid a folder across the table and told me he had a clean solution. I could transfer voting control to him for 5 years, keep a generous salary, remain the face of operations, and avoid the stress of leadership. I opened the folder. The agreement was already printed. My name was already typed under the signature line. "You brought paperwork to lunch?" I asked. He smiled. "I brought stability." I pushed it back. "Dad gave me control for a reason." His smile faded just enough for me to see the anger underneath. Dad was emotional. He was sick. He let nostalgia make a business decision. That was the first time I truly wanted to leave the table. Not because he insulted me, but because he insulted the dead man whose company he was trying to take. I stood up, told him I would not discuss it again, and walked out while he sat there with that folder still open between the water glasses. 2 days later, I discovered someone had accessed my company email after midnight and sent messages to a regional competitor asking about a possible acquisition conversation. The language was polite, careful, and nothing like mine. The messages suggested I was overwhelmed and privately considering selling before winter contracts renewed. I checked the login history. The access came from inside our own office network. When I confronted Logan, he barely blinked. "Maybe you forgot," he said. "Stress does things to people." I should have called the police that day. Instead, I changed my passwords, ordered an internal audit, and told myself grief was making both of us unrecognizable. But grief does not forge emails. Grief does not prepare documents. Grief does not look you in the eye and test how much poison you are willing to swallow before you call it betrayal. The next warning came from a driver named Ellis, who knocked on my office door with his cap twisted in both hands and fear all over his face. He told me a temperature log from one of our medical shipments had been altered. The original reading showed the trailer stayed within range the entire route, but the file in the compliance folder showed a dangerous spike that could have ruined a shipment of insulin. I asked who had uploaded the changed file. He looked down and said the system showed my credentials. My mouth went dry. I knew immediately this was bigger than fake emails. Somebody was building a case that I was careless, unstable, and dangerous to the business. I went to the server room and pulled access records. Half of what I needed was missing. Not deleted badly, deleted professionally. Logan had been a banker, but before that, he had studied systems compliance and risk management. He knew exactly which mistakes looked accidental and which ones looked criminal. That evening, he called me and said we needed to talk at the old North Pier depot, the abandoned repair garage my father had stopped using 3 years earlier after we moved to the new warehouse. I almost said no. Then he said he had found paper copies of the original temperature logs in Dad's old files, and if I wanted to protect myself, I needed to see them before the audit team arrived Monday morning. He sounded serious, even worried. "Harper," he said quietly, "this could get ugly. I'm trying to help you before it goes too far." I hated that part of me still wanted to believe him. Maybe because we had eaten cereal from the same kitchen table as kids. Maybe because he had once carried me inside after I fell through pond ice when I was 9. Maybe because admitting your own brother is hunting you takes longer than it should. I drove to the depot just before sunset. The place sat behind a chain-link fence near the edge of an industrial road, surrounded by snowbanks gray with road salt. The main building was dark except for one light near the office door. Logan's SUV was parked outside, engine running, exhaust drifting into the cold. He came out wearing a wool coat and leather gloves, looking like a man arriving at a board meeting instead of a forgotten truck yard. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Let's make this quick." Inside the small office, he handed me a file thick with printed reports. At first, I did not understand what I was looking at. Then, I saw my name on approval forms I had never signed, my initials beside shipments I never released, and a statement claiming I had ordered a driver to continue after a temperature alarm. "This is fake," I said. Logan leaned against the desk. "It looks real." I turned a page and saw a scan of my electronic signature attached to an emergency override request. "You made this." "Careful," he said. "Accusing people without evidence is exactly the kind of behavior that worries everyone." "Everyone?" He opened another folder. Inside was a letter supposedly drafted by a corporate physician, claiming I was showing signs of severe emotional instability after my father's death and should temporarily step away from executive responsibilities. My hands went cold for a reason that had nothing to do with the weather. "You are trying to have me declared unfit." Logan sighed like I was disappointing him. "I'm trying to save the company from a leadership crisis." Then he placed one final document on the desk, a temporary transfer of voting authority. 90 days, my signature line highlighted in yellow. "Sign this, and the compliance issue disappears. I stabilize the lender relationships, handle the acquisition offers, and you can take time to recover." "Acquisition offers," I repeated. "So that's what this is." He did not deny it. "We are sitting on a company worth more broken apart than alive. The warehouse land alone could clear our debt and make us rich. There is no debt that requires selling." His face changed then. The polished calm cracked, and I saw panic underneath. Not guilt. Panic. "You do not understand the position we are in." "No," I said. "I think I finally do." I reached for my phone, but he moved faster. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to hurt, took the phone from my hand, and slipped it into his coat pocket. For 1 second we both froze. That was the moment there was no going back. "Give it back," I said. He smiled, but his eyes were dead. "You always were stubborn." He told me the original files were in the garage, in a box my father had stored inside the old refrigerated service truck. I refused to follow him until he held up my keys and said, You can stand here all night or you can get the proof you came for. I should have run. I should have screamed then, while we were still near the road. But the thought of my father's files, the thought that one paper might clear my name, pulled me forward. The garage was 30 yards behind the office, a long steel building with a roll-up door and a side entrance. Logan unlocked the side door and motioned me in. Back shelf, he said. Blue box. I stepped inside. The air smelled like old oil, frozen rubber, and dust. I took 3 steps toward the shelves. Behind me, the door slammed so hard the sound exploded through the building. I turned just as the lock snapped into place. "Logan!" I shouted, using his name for the first time that night like it could still remind him who he was. His voice came through the door. "You have until tomorrow afternoon to reconsider." I ran at the door and kicked it. Pain shot up my leg. "Open this door." "You should have signed, Harper." "You can't do this." There was a pause, then a soft laugh. "I already did." He told me he had emailed the staff from my account, saying I was taking a private grief retreat and did not want calls. He told me he had scheduled the emergency transfer meeting for the next afternoon. He told me that by the time anyone wondered where I was, he would control the company, the bank accounts, and the sale process. Then came the line that stayed in my head all night. "You can scream all you want. No one's coming." His footsteps moved away. A car door opened. The engine faded down the road. And I stood in the dark, locked inside the graveyard of my father's old machines, realizing my brother had not just trapped me. He had erased me. The first hour was anger. I threw my shoulder against the door until the bones in my arm felt loose. I kicked near the lock, then the hinges, then the frame. The door did not move. My father had installed it after a break-in years earlier, proud of how solid it was, proud that nobody could force their way into his repair garage again. I remember laughing when he said that. Now the thing he built to keep thieves out was keeping me in. I searched the walls for switches, outlets, windows, anything. The overhead lights flickered once, then died completely, leaving only a weak gray strip of evening leaking through a vent high above the workbench. I dragged a metal shelf beneath it and climbed up, but the vent was too narrow for my shoulders and bolted from the outside. I shouted anyway. I screamed until my throat burned. No answer. Outside, the wind moved across the empty depot and made the steel walls creak like something alive. By the 3rd hour, my anger became math. How cold was it? How long before the temperature inside matched the temperature outside? How much energy had I wasted screaming? What could I use? I found an old tarp folded under a tire rack, a pair of stiff work gloves, a cracked flashlight with no batteries, 2 frozen bottles of water, and a box of emergency hand warmers so old the packets felt like sand. One of them worked a little. I held it between my palms like a candle. There was no food except a peppermint stuck to the bottom of a drawer, and I ate it without caring how old it was. I wrapped myself in the tarp and kept walking circles around the garage because sitting still made the cold climb up my legs. Every few minutes I tried the door again, not because I thought it would open, but because doing nothing felt too much like accepting death. At some point, I found my father's old white service truck parked beneath a sheet of dust. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, the seat smelled faintly like him. Coffee, leather, and wintergreen gum. That nearly broke me. I sat behind the wheel and gripped it with both hands, remembering all the mornings he drove me to the warehouse before sunrise, telling me that leadership was not about barking orders, but being the last person to give up when everyone else was tired. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and whispered, "I'm trying." Then I searched the cab. No keys, no phone, no emergency kit. The glove compartment held old receipts, a tire pressure gauge, and a faded photo of me at 17 standing beside my first delivery truck, grinning like I had conquered the world because Dad trusted me to inspect a route sheet. I put the photo in my pocket. By hour 10, the cold stopped feeling sharp and started feeling heavy. That scared me more. I knew enough from winter safety training to understand what it meant when shivering slowed down. I forced myself to move faster. I did squats beside the truck. I slapped my arms. I stomped my feet until my toes screamed, then went numb again. I tried to melt the frozen water bottles under my hoodie, but the water came out in bitter little mouthfuls. I rationed them anyway. The darkness became strange after midnight. Sounds grew bigger. A drip somewhere behind the shelves. The groan of metal cooling. My own breath. I thought about Logan sitting somewhere warm, maybe rehearsing concern in front of a mirror. I imagined him telling people I was fragile, that I needed rest, that he was only stepping in because he loved me. That made me angrier than the cold. If he had just wanted money, that would have been ugly but simple. But he wanted my name destroyed too. He wanted the world to believe I had failed, that I was unstable, that my father had been wrong to trust me. Around dawn, light seeped through the vent, pale and useless. I had survived the night, but survival did not feel like victory. My lips were cracked. My hands were swollen from hitting the door. My thoughts came slowly, like they were pushing through snow. I climbed back into the truck because it blocked some of the wind leaking through the seams. That was when my knee hit something beneath the dashboard. A black box mounted low under the radio panel. For a second, I thought it was part of the truck's old stereo system. Then I saw the coiled microphone cord, a two-way radio. My father had installed it years ago after a cell outage stranded 2 drivers during an ice storm. He never fully trusted smartphones after that. Old systems fail slower, he used to say. My hands shook so badly I could barely find the power switch. Nothing happened. I tried again. A faint orange light blinked, then faded, then came back. The radio hissed with static. The truck battery was weak, maybe almost dead, maybe giving me minutes instead of hours. I lifted the microphone. My voice came out broken. Emergency. This is Harper Vale. I'm locked inside the old North Pier Depot garage. I need help. Static answered. I changed channels. Tried again. Please. If anyone can hear me, I'm trapped. No phone, no heat. North Pier Depot. More static. The light flickered. I imagined the battery dying while my voice disappeared into empty air. I tried one more channel, one my father used for overnight dispatch. This is Harper Vale. My brother locked me in. He's trying to take my father's business. Please, someone answer. The silence afterward felt endless. Then the speaker crackled. A woman's voice came through, cautious and rough with disbelief. Say that name again. I gripped the microphone with both hands. Harper Vale. A pause. Then the voice said something that made my heart stop. Harper, if this is a joke, it's a cruel one. I swallowed against the pain in my throat. It's not a joke. I'm freezing. Another burst of static. Then she said, This is Mara Quinn. Tell me exactly where you are. Mara Quinn was the last person I expected to save my life. 18 months earlier, she had been our best overnight dispatch coordinator until a missing medical shipment ruined her career. Every record had pointed to her. Access logs, route changes, override approvals, even an email from her account. She swore she had been framed, but Logan said the evidence was clear, and I believed the paperwork instead of her. Now, half frozen in my father's old truck, her voice was the only thing keeping me from disappearing. I told her everything through the dying radio, the fake temperature logs, the transfer papers, Logan taking my phone, the garage, and the meeting scheduled that afternoon. For a moment, she went silent. Then she said, I have been waiting 1.5 years for someone else to say out loud what he does. The radio light flickered. Mara told me not to sleep, to keep moving, and that she was coming with someone she trusted. Then the battery died. I forced myself to walk circles until I heard tires outside, then voices, then metal cutters biting into the lock. When the door finally opened, daylight hit me so hard I almost fell. Mara stood beside a police officer staring at me with shock and anger. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me warm water and helped me into her truck. She did not hug me. I had not earned that yet. She opened a weatherproof case from her back seat filled with documents, flash drives, and recordings. She had been building a file on Logan for months. Shell companies, manipulated temperature logs, route data sold to a competitor, and proof he had framed her after she caught a duplicate invoice tied to his account. The officer wanted me taken to the hospital, but Mara checked her phone and said the emergency transfer meeting was still on at 3 o'clock. Logan thought I was still locked away. He thought he had time to steal my father's company in a suit. I looked at Mara's evidence case and asked, "Can we stop him?" She nodded. "With what I have, maybe. With what you know, definitely." Before we left the depot, Mara looked at the garage and said, "I hated you for not believing me." I answered, "You should have." She said, "Help me end this. Then we'll talk about forgiveness." And for the first time in 24 hours, I was no longer waiting to be found. I was going back to fight. We did not go straight to the bank. Mara knew evidence worked best when it arrived with witnesses, authority, and timing. The police officer contacted a financial crimes investigator, while Mara called a transportation compliance officer who had already been reviewing Vale Cold Line's records. Then we went to the main warehouse. When I walked in wrapped in a borrowed coat, with bruised hands and a voice almost gone, the entire room froze. Everyone had received an email from my account saying I was away on a private grief retreat and emotionally unstable. Logan had not only trapped me, he had prepared the story people were supposed to believe. Because I still owned controlling interest, I authorized access to the company archives, server backups, fleet logs, and executive records. Mara found what Logan had missed, my father's old physical backup drive, locked under the route planning desk. On it were the original temperature logs beside the altered ones. The fake shipment failure never happened. My signature had been attached days later. The files used to frame Mara had also been created from Logan's office terminal. Then came the financial proof. Shell company payments, duplicate invoices, secret consulting fees from Northern Harbor Freight, and a draft sale agreement promising Logan a bonus if he delivered control of the company. Our attorney called and said Logan was already at the bank, preparing to present emergency transfer documents. We arrived at 2:58. Logan was in the conference room with bank representatives, lawyers, and a notary, wearing my father's silver tie clip like he had already inherited everything. He turned when the door opened, and the color drained from his face. "Harper," he said quickly. "Thank God. We were worried." I stepped inside and said, "No, Logan. You were worried I survived." The investigator laid out the original logs, forged documents, shell company records, and altered access history. Mara walked in behind him, and Logan's mask finally cracked. He called her a disgruntled former employee, but then the officer placed my phone, keys, and wallet on the table in an evidence bag, recovered from Logan's SUV. The room went silent. Northern Harbor Freight withdrew from the deal. The bank suspended every transfer document. Our attorney refused to recognize any authority Logan claimed. Logan tried to say he was protecting the company, but Mara played a recording of his own voice. "Once Harper is out of the way, the board language is easy. People believe what paperwork tells them." That was the end. The officers told him to turn around. He looked at me with pure hatred and said, "You have no idea what you've done." I thought about the garage, the cold, Mara's ruined career, and my father's stolen trust. "I know exactly what I've done," I said. "I came back." They cuffed him in front of everyone he had tried to impress. As they led him out, he shouted that Vale Cold Line would collapse without him. I looked at him one last time and said, "This company survived blizzards, breakdowns, and blackout nights. It can survive one thief." The story hit the local news before the sun went down. At first, the headline was simple: Duluth logistics executive arrested during business transfer meeting. By the next morning, it had become something uglier and more accurate. Brother accused of locking sister in abandoned garage to seize family company. I spent the night in the hospital with mild hypothermia, dehydration, bruised hands, and a nurse who kept telling me I was lucky. I knew she was right, but luck did not feel like the right word. Luck was random. What saved me was my father's old radio, Mara's refusal to stay silent, and the part of me that kept moving when lying down would have been easier. Investigators searched Logan's home, office, laptop, cloud drives, and financial accounts. Every day for the next week, something new surfaced. He had been negotiating with Northern Harbor Freight for months. He had promised them internal client lists, warehouse land access, and discounted fleet assets once he controlled the company. He had created shell companies to receive consulting payments. He had altered safety logs to make me look reckless, framed Mara to eliminate the one employee who noticed the pattern, and built a fake narrative that grief had made me unstable. The medical letter he planned to use against me was forged with a stolen physician's signature from a public filing. The temperature records were manipulated. The emails from my account were traced to his devices. The emergency transfer papers were prepared before my father was even buried. That last detail stayed with me. Some betrayals begin before you know you are in danger. Logan eventually faced charges for unlawful imprisonment, corporate fraud, forgery, evidence tampering, identity misuse, coercion, and financial crimes tied to the attempted sale. His lawyers tried to argue he panicked under business pressure. The prosecutor answered by laying out the timeline: months of forged documents, staged compliance failures, hidden payments, and then one locked door. Panic does not create spreadsheets. Panic does not register shell companies. Panic does not steal your sister's phone and leave her in freezing temperatures while you walk into a bank wearing your dead father's tie clip. 3 months later, Logan accepted a plea deal. 14 years in state prison, restitution to Vale Cold Line Logistics, restitution to Mara, forfeiture of his voting and profit rights until civil claims were resolved, and a permanent ban from holding financial authority in any company connected to regulated transport. When I heard the sentence, I did not cheer. People expect revenge to feel like fireworks, but real justice feels heavier than that. It felt like setting down a box I had carried so long my arms no longer knew how to be empty. Mara came back to Vale Cold Line, not as the woman people whispered about, but as Director of Compliance and Safety Integrity. Her first condition was simple: no hidden reviews, no closed-door blame, no system where one powerful person could destroy a worker with paperwork nobody questioned. I agreed before she finished the sentence. We rebuilt everything. Every temperature log became independently mirrored. Every emergency override required dual verification. Every employee accused of misconduct received transparent review rights. We created a hardship and legal support fund for drivers, warehouse staff, and dispatchers who were wrongly blamed or pressured to stay quiet. I wanted the company to do more than survive Logan. I wanted it to become the kind of place where his methods could never work again. Some clients left when the scandal broke. More returned when they saw we had exposed the truth instead of burying it. A hospital network renewed its contract because, as their director told me, mistakes scare us less than cover-ups. That sentence became part of how I led. My father built Vale Cold Line on reliability, but I learned reliability is not just delivering cargo on time. It is telling the truth when the truth costs you. It is protecting people below you, not just pleasing people above you. It is understanding that a business is not a family because someone says it is. It becomes one only when people are safe enough to speak. As for Logan, I have not visited him. Maybe one day I will be ready to ask him why he thought money was worth more than my life, but I am not there yet. Forgiveness is not a performance you owe people because they share your blood. Sometimes the most honest thing you can do is build a boundary strong enough to protect the person you fought so hard to become. What happened in that garage taught me that family can be real, but it must never be used as a weapon. Love without respect becomes control. Loyalty without truth becomes a cage. And silence in the face of wrongdoing only teaches cruel people that their cruelty works. The lesson I carry now is simple. Protect your integrity before you protect someone's image. Ask for help before pride traps you alone. Believe evidence, but also listen when good people say something is wrong. And when someone tries to take your voice, survive long enough to use it louder than ever. My brother wanted me cold, silent, and forgotten inside that garage. Instead, I walked out, took back my father's company, cleared an innocent woman's name, and learned that the strongest families are not always the ones we are born into. Sometimes they are the people who answer through the static when everyone else has left you in the dark.